Everything you think you know about ancient philosophy is wrong, not because the ideas were bad, but because we've been telling the story backward. We start with Socrates, jump to Plato, then Aristotle, as if wisdom began in Athens with marble columns and orderly dialogues. But decades before Socrates was born, a man stood at the edge of the Greek world and declared that reality itself was fire, that nothing stays the same, that war is the father of all things. His name was Heraclitus, and he's the reason philosophy exists as we know it. He lived around 500 BC in Ephesus, a wealthy city on the coast of what's now Turkey. While other thinkers were trying to find the one permanent substance underlying reality, water or air or earth, Heraclitus looked at the world and saw something else entirely: flux, change, conflict, everything flowing like a river, nothing fixed, nothing stable. He wrote it down in fragments, cryptic statements that read more like riddles than arguments, and then he walked away from public life entirely, retreating to the mountains to live alone, eating grass and plants, avoiding human contact until he died in the most bizarre way imaginable. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, because to understand why Heraclitus matters, why his ideas still echo through physics and psychology, and every attempt to grasp what reality actually is, we need to start where he started. In a city that had everything, and a family that expected him to become something he refused to be. Ephesus wasn't just any Greek city. It was one of the wealthiest ports in the entire Mediterranean, a crossroads where traders from Egypt, Persia, and the Greek islands met to exchange goods and stories. The great temple of Artemis stood at its heart, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, drawing pilgrims and merchants and priests. Money flowed through the city like water. The harbour was packed with ships. The streets were lined with workshops producing textiles, jewellery, pottery that would travel across the known world. Into this prosperity, probably around 535 BC, Heraclitus was born. His family was aristocratic, connected to the city's founders, possibly even descended from the original king. This wasn't just wealth, it was lineage, status, the kind of position that came with expectations. His father's name was Bluzon, though some sources say Heracon. The details are hazy, filtered through centuries of retelling. What's clear is that the family held a hereditary religious office, a priesthood connected to the cult of Demeter Eleusinia. This priesthood wasn't ceremonial. It carried real authority, real responsibility. When Heraclitus came of age, the position should have passed to him. The role was his by birthright, the kind of honour that families fought to preserve. And Heraclitus did something almost unthinkable. He gave it to his brother. Why? The ancient sources don't explain. Maybe he saw the priesthood as empty ritual. Maybe he'd already started thinking thoughts that made religious office feel like a cage. Maybe he simply looked at the life laid out before him, the comfortable path of privilege and ceremony and civic duty, and decided it was worthless. Whatever the reason, he walked away from the one thing his family had spent generations building toward. This wasn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. Heraclitus didn't reject the priesthood to chase pleasure, or wealth, or fame. He rejected it to think, to observe, to try to understand what was actually happening beneath the surface of things. While his brother performed the rituals, Heraclitus began writing. We don't have his book. Not really. What survives are fragments, roughly 130 pieces quoted by later writers, preserved because someone centuries later thought they were worth copying down. The original work, if it was a unified work at all, is lost. But those fragments hit like hammer strikes. You cannot step into the same river twice. Everyone knows that one. But here's what most people miss. Heraclitus wasn't making a poetic observation about the passage of time. He was attacking the entire foundation of how Greeks thought about reality. For centuries, philosophers had been searching for the permanent substance underlying change. Thales said everything was water. Anaximenes said air. They wanted the one stable thing that persisted while appearances shifted. Heraclitus said, there is no stable thing. The river is the change. Fire transforms into air, air into water, water into earth, and earth back into fire. Nothing rests, nothing remains. The cosmos is a living process, constantly dying and being reborn. This world order, the same for all, no god or man made, but it always was and is and will be, an ever-living fire, kindling in measures and going out in measures. This wasn't philosophy as polite inquiry. This was philosophy as declaration of war against comfortable assumptions. And Heraclitus knew exactly what he was doing. He called most people sleepers, going through life in a kind of waking dream, never actually seeing what's in front of them. Though the logos is common, most people live as if they had a private understanding. The logos, that word would become crucial. It means something like reason, or order, or the underlying pattern that governs everything. Heraclitus claimed it was right there, available to anyone who looked. But nobody looked. They preferred their illusions. The style matches the message. His fragments are deliberately difficult, compressed, paradoxical. The way up and the way down are one and the same. Seawater is both pure and polluted, drinkable for fish, deadly for humans. Disease makes health sweet, hunger satisfaction, weariness rest. He's not trying to confuse people, he's trying to wake them up, to force them to think rather than just absorb. Other philosophers noticed. Parmenides, who came shortly after, built his entire system as a direct response to Heraclitus. Where Heraclitus said everything changes, Parmenides said nothing changes. Reality is one, eternal, unchanging. Motion itself is an illusion. The debate between these two positions would echo for the next 2,000 years, through Plato, through medieval theology, through modern physics. But Heraclitus didn't stick around to argue. At some point, probably in his 40s or 50s, he left Ephesus entirely. The sources say he retreated to the mountains, living alone, surviving on plants and grass. Why? Again, the ancient writers don't give us clean answers. Diogenes Laertius, writing centuries later, says Heraclitus became a misanthrope, disgusted with human stupidity, that he couldn't stand watching people go about their lives in ignorance, so he removed himself entirely. There's another possibility. Maybe he'd said what he needed to say, and saw no point in repeating it. Maybe he'd looked at Ephesus, at its wealth and its temple, and its busy harbour, and realised that no amount of talking would change anything. People would continue to live as if they understood, would continue to mistake their private dreams for reality, so he left them to it. The mountain period is where the story gets strange. According to the accounts, Heraclitus developed dropsy, an accumulation of fluid in the body's tissues. The ancient writers describe him as swollen, his body filling with water. He came down from the mountains to consult physicians, but being Heraclitus, he couldn't ask a straightforward question. He asked them in riddles whether they could make a drought out of a rainy season. The doctors had no idea what he meant, so he went home. What happened next depends on which source you read. Some say he buried himself in a warm cowshed, covering his body with manure, hoping the heat would evaporate the excess fluid. Others say he simply lay in the sun. Either way, the treatment didn't work. He died probably around 475 BC, alone, his body betraying the mind that had seen so clearly. It's a grotesque end for someone who'd spent his life trying to understand the transformations of matter. Fire to water to earth and back again. And here he was, unable to stop his own body from filling with water, drowning from the inside. There's something almost fitting about it, though. The philosopher of flux, unable to arrest the changes happening in his own flesh. But here's what's strange. For all his difficulty, for all his contempt for ordinary people and their illusions, Heraclitus's ideas survived. Not just survived, but grew. By the time of Plato, Every educated Greek knew the basic claim: everything flows, nothing stays the same. The later Stoics, particularly Marcus Aurelius, absorbed Heraclitus wholesale. Time is a river of passing events, Marcus wrote, and its current is strong. That's pure Heraclitus, filtered through 5 centuries. The early Christians seized on the Logos concept. In the beginning was the Logos, the Gospel of John opens. That's not accidental. John's author was drawing on a philosophical tradition that stretched back to Heraclitus, reinterpreting the impersonal cosmic reason as a personal god. Whether Heraclitus would have approved is another question. What makes this transmission remarkable is that it happened despite Heraclitus himself. He didn't found a school, he didn't gather disciples, he didn't stick around to clarify his more cryptic statements. He said what he had to say, then walked away, and somehow that worked. The fragments were strange enough, challenging enough, true enough that people kept copying them, kept arguing about them, kept trying to figure out what this angry hermit had actually meant. Part of the power is the fragments themselves. Because we don't have the full book, because we only have these isolated statements preserved by later writers, each fragment hits with concentrated force. Character is destiny. 3 words. Entire philosophies have been built on less. The sun is new each day. Simple statement, world-shattering implication. If the sun is literally new every morning, if it's not the same object persisting through time, but something constantly being destroyed and recreated, then what does that say about identity, about continuity, about whether anything persists at all? Modern physics has caught up to Heraclitus in weird ways. Quantum field theory describes particles not as little billiard balls, but as excitations in underlying fields, constantly appearing and disappearing. The vacuum of space isn't empty, but seething with virtual particles popping in and out of existence. Nothing is stable at the smallest scales. Everything is process, transformation, flux. Heraclitus couldn't have known this. He didn't have particle accelerators, but he looked at fire and water and the way things change, and he saw something essential. The question is whether he was right. Not about the physics, which he obviously couldn't have worked out in detail, but about the fundamental nature of reality. Is change more basic than permanence? Is stability an illusion we impose on flux? Or did Parmenides have it backward, and the real world is the unchanging realm beyond appearance? This isn't just abstract philosophy, it shapes how we think about ourselves. If everything flows, if nothing stays the same, then who are you? The body you had 7 years ago has been completely replaced, every cell new. The person you were at 10, at 20, at 40, are they the same person? Is there some core self that persists? Or are you more like Heraclitus's river, appearing continuous but actually different at every moment? We'll need to examine his actual ideas more carefully. The fragments about fire, about the Logos, about war and strife, and the hidden harmony that emerges from opposition. Because Heraclitus wasn't just saying everything changes. He was describing a cosmos held together by tension, where opposites don't just coexist but require each other, where conflict isn't a breakdown of order, but the source of it. That claim, that war is the father of all things, sounds brutal, and it is, but understanding what Heraclitus meant by it, why he thought tension and strife were necessary rather than destructive, that's where his philosophy gets genuinely strange, where it starts to sound less like ancient mysticism and more like a description of how complex systems actually work. How you can't have health without disease, satisfaction without hunger, meaning without struggle. How the world isn't trying to reach equilibrium, but is held together by the very forces pulling it apart. Let's start with the most famous fragment. You cannot step into the same river twice, except Heraclitus probably didn't say it that way. The actual fragment, as preserved by Plato, is more cryptic. Upon those who step into the same rivers, different and again different waters flow. It's not about you stepping into different rivers, it's about the same river being different waters. The river is both constant and changing simultaneously. That's the point. The thing that stays the same is the thing that's always different. This sounds like a riddle. It's meant to. Heraclitus wrote in riddles deliberately. He wanted you to struggle with the meaning. Easy answers teach nothing. You have to work at understanding, and in that work something shifts in how you see the world. The river example is perfect because it captures something we all know but rarely think about. The Connecticut River has been flowing for thousands of years. Same river, but the water in it right now isn't the water that was in it yesterday. That water is miles downstream, maybe already in Long Island Sound. The river persists while its contents are in constant flux, identity through change. That's the puzzle. And it's not just rivers. Your body replaces its cells constantly. Red blood cells last about 4 months. Skin cells regenerate every few weeks. Even bone cells, which seem permanent, are replaced over years. The atoms that make up your body right now weren't there a decade ago. You're like the river, same person, different stuff, except there's a deeper problem. The river at least has banks, a channel, a path that stays relatively fixed. You don't even have that. The patterns that make you you, your memories, your personality, your way of thinking, those are changing too. You're not the person you were at 15, not just physically. The memories you have of being 15 have been edited, reconstructed, altered by everything that happened since. The person you were then no longer exists except as a story you tell yourself now. Heraclitus took this seriously. If everything is in flux, then knowledge itself becomes tricky. How do you know something about a world that won't hold still? This is where the fragments about fire come in. Fire was, for Heraclitus, the fundamental element. Not because everything is literally made of fire, but because fire is the perfect image of reality. Fire is pure transformation. It exists only by consuming what it's not. Wood becomes flame, becomes smoke, becomes ash. The fire persists through this process, while constantly changing its material substrate. It's not a thing. It's a process that looks like a thing. Fragment 30. This cosmos the same for all, no god nor man made, but it ever was, and is, and will be, ever-living fire, kindling in measures, and being quenched in measures. The universe is fire, not metaphorically, actually. Ever-living fire that burns in controlled measures, neither consuming everything at once nor going out completely. Reality is combustion, controlled, measured, eternal combustion. Everything else, earth, water, air, these are just fire in different states. Fire condensing into water, water solidifying into earth, earth evaporating back into fire. Constant transformation, but following laws, maintaining measures. Why fire specifically? Because fire can't be possessed. You can't hold it, store it, keep it. You can only maintain the conditions that allow it to continue. A fire requires fuel, oxygen, heat. Remove any of those, and it ceases. It's not a substance, but a process, a relationship between things that enables transformation. And that's what Heraclitus thought reality was. Not stuff that changes, but change itself, temporarily taking the form of stuff. This is where the logos comes in. That word is impossible to translate cleanly. It means word, reason, account, proportion, ratio, all at once. For Heraclitus, the logos is the pattern that governs change. The cosmos isn't random flux, it's ordered transformation. Fire doesn't just burn wildly, it kindles in measures and is quenched in measures. There's a ratio, a proportion, a logic to how things transform. Fragment 1 states it clearly. Though this logos is always the case, humans prove unable to understand it, both before hearing it and when they have first heard it. The pattern is right there, operating constantly, but people miss it. They think they're surrounded by separate, stable things, when actually they're embedded in a web of transformations following intelligible laws. Understanding the logos requires recognizing that opposites aren't separate categories. They're phases of the same process. Fragment 88. As the same thing in us are living and dead, waking and sleeping, young and old. For these things having changed around are those, and those having changed around are these. What you call life is just death not yet completed. What you call death is life having transformed. They're not opposites, they're the same process viewed from different moments. This sounds morbid, but Heraclitus isn't being pessimistic. He's trying to show that the categories we use to divide experience are artificial. The real world doesn't have clean boundaries. It has continuous transformation that we arbitrarily chop into discrete states. Health and disease are another example. You think you're either healthy or sick, but health is the process of successfully fighting off disease. You're always slightly sick. Your immune system is constantly battling invaders. What you call health is winning that battle, and what you call disease is losing it. But it's the same battle, the same process. Remove the disease entirely, and you'd have no immune system. The health requires the disease to exist against. They define each other. This is what Heraclitus meant by hidden harmony. Fragment 54. Hidden harmony is better than obvious harmony. The obvious harmony would be a world where everything is peaceful, stable, at rest. But that's not harmony. That's death. Real harmony is the tension between opposites, the way a bow works. You pull the string back against the wood. The wood resists, neither side wins completely. The tension between them is what allows the arrow to fly. If the string had no resistance, no arrow. If the wood didn't push back, no arrow. The conflict creates the function. Or a lyre, the ancient Greek stringed instrument. The strings are stretched tight over the frame. The frame pulls one way, the strings pull the other. That tension, that strife between opposing forces is what allows the instruments to make sound. Slack strings produce nothing. Strings stretched so tight they snap produce nothing. The harmony, the music, requires the precise tension between opposites. Fragment 51. They do not understand how, though at variance with itself, it agrees with itself. It is a backward-turning connection, like that of a bow or a lyre. The universe agrees with itself by being at variance with itself. The unity comes from opposition, not despite it. This leads to the most disturbing fragment. Fragment 53. War is the father of all and king of all. It reveals some as gods, others as humans. It makes some slaves, others free. War, polemos in Greek, doesn't just mean military conflict. It means strife, opposition, tension, the forces pulling against each other. Heraclitus is saying, this is fundamental. Not that we should celebrate war, but that opposition is the generative principle of reality. Without it, nothing happens, nothing changes, nothing exists. Think about your own experience. You become stronger by lifting weights that resist you. You become smarter by encountering problems that challenge you. You become who you are by pushing against the world and having it push back. If everything came easily, if there were no resistance, no difficulty, no opposition, you'd never develop. The struggle isn't interfering with your growth. It is your growth. The opposition creates you. Heraclitus applied this universally. Day and night aren't just alternating states. Each produces the other. The day contains the night it's becoming. The night contains the day it will be. Hot and cold aren't opposites. They're degrees of the same thing, and each generates its opposite. Heat something enough and it radiates, cooling itself. Cool something enough and the molecules slow, which is a form of potential heat waiting to be released. Up and down, the famous fragment about the road, it's the same road whether you're going up or down. The direction depends on your perspective, but the road itself doesn't change. This is why Heraclitus hated Homer. Homer was the supreme poet of ancient Greece, the foundation of their education, but Homer prayed for an end to strife. In the Iliad, he writes, Would that strife might vanish from among gods and men. Heraclitus called this foolishness. If strife vanished, everything would vanish. No tension, no existence. Homer didn't understand that the conflicts he was depicting weren't aberrations to be overcome, but the very structure of reality. The war between Greeks and Trojans, between Achilles and Agamemnon, between gods and mortals, these weren't breakdowns of order. They were order manifesting as conflict. Fragment 80 makes it explicit. One must know that war is common and justice is strife, and that all things come to be through strife and necessity. Justice itself is strife. Not harmony imposed on strife, but strife properly balanced. A just society isn't one where conflict has been eliminated, but one where conflicts are held in productive tension, where different interests push against each other in ways that prevent any single force from dominating completely. This sounds almost modern, like a description of checks and balances in government. And maybe that's not coincidental. Maybe Heraclitus was seeing something about how stable systems actually work. Complex systems require tension to remain stable. An ecosystem with only predators collapses. An ecosystem with only prey collapses. You need both in opposition, creating a dynamic equilibrium. The predators keep the prey population from overwhelming the food supply. The prey keep the predators from starving. The conflict between them is what sustains both. Remove the conflict and you destroy the system. Same with your body. You're not a static object. You're a controlled war between building up and breaking down. Anabolism and catabolism. Cells are constantly being built and destroyed. The balance between these opposing processes is what keeps you alive. Too much building and you get cancer. Too much breaking down and you waste away. Health is the strife between construction and destruction, perfectly balanced. Heraclitus saw this pattern everywhere, and he insisted that most people miss it because they're looking for stability, for things that stay put. Fragment 56. Men are deceived in the recognition of what is obvious. Like Homer, wisest of all the Greeks. Even the wisest miss what's right in front of them because they're asking the wrong questions. They're trying to find what persists when they should be trying to understand how things transform. But here's the problem. If everything is in flux, if nothing stays the same, then how do we talk about anything? Language requires stable references. The word tree has to point to something consistent, or communication breaks down. If the tree is completely different every moment, then what are we even naming? Heraclitus had an answer, though it's hard to reconstruct from fragments. The logos, that pattern of transformation, is what persists, not the things, but the laws governing their changes. Fire becomes water becomes, earth becomes fire again, but that cycle, that pattern, that's constant. The specific fire might be different, but the process of transformation follows the same measures. This is almost like modern physics. Particles aren't really particles. They're quantum fields, constantly fluctuating, with what we call particles being temporary excitations in those fields. But the fields themselves and the laws governing their behaviour, those are constant. Or at least that's our current best understanding. Heraclitus couldn't have known about quantum fields, but he was grasping towards something similar. The fundamental reality isn't the stuff. It's the pattern of transformation that the stuff temporarily embodies. Fragment 50 summarizes it. Listening not to me, but to the Logos, it is wise to agree that all things are one. Not listening to Heraclitus, the person, but to the pattern itself. And what the pattern reveals is unity. Not the unity of everything being the same, but the unity of everything being interconnected transformations of the same underlying process. Fire, water, earth, fire. Life, death, life. Waking, sleeping, waking. These aren't separate things happening to separate entities. They're one continuous process, manifesting in different forms. That's the hidden harmony, not peace, but the unity that emerges from opposition. the way a single process can generate apparent opposites that require each other to exist. This is why Heraclitus is so difficult to understand. He's not building a system you can memorize. He's pointing at something you have to see for yourself. And what you have to see is that the very act of trying to pin things down misses the point. You're trying to catch water in a net made of concepts. Fragment 93. The Lord, whose oracle is at Delphi, neither declares nor conceals, but gives a sign. The oracle doesn't give you answers. It gives you hints that force you to think. That's what Heraclitus is doing. These fragments aren't propositions to accept or reject. They're provocations designed to shift how you look at reality. But let's be honest, this is exhausting. If everything is always changing, if we can't trust our senses or our concepts, if the wise thing is to see unity in opposition, what are we supposed to do with that? How does this help us live? Here's where Heraclitus gets practical, though you'd never know it from how he's usually taught. The fragments about flux and fire and logos aren't abstract metaphysics for their own sake. They have ethical implications. How you understand reality determines how you act. Fragment 112. Thinking well is the greatest excellence, and wisdom is to speak the truth and act in accord with nature, paying heed to it. Thinking well. Not just thinking cleverly or thinking a lot, thinking in a way that's aligned with how things actually work. And what does that mean? Speaking truth and acting according to nature. Not fighting against the pattern, but working with it. Most people, according to Heraclitus, are asleep. Fragment 1 again. Though this logos is always so, men always prove unable to understand it, both before hearing it and when they have first heard it. They go through life like sleepwalkers, never waking up to the pattern that's right in front of them. They treat their private dreams as reality and ignore the common world that everyone shares. Waking up means recognizing the logos, seeing the pattern, understanding that conflict drives everything, that opposites require each other, that unity emerges from tension. Once you see that, you act differently. You stop demanding that things stay the same. You stop resisting change. You recognize that the tension you're experiencing, the conflict, the difficulty, that's not a bug. That's the feature. That's how the system maintains itself. Fragment 111. Disease makes health pleasant and good. Hunger, satiety, weariness, rest. You can't appreciate health without experiencing disease. The good emerges from the bad, or rather, they define each other. This isn't optimism. It's not saying everything happens for a reason or that suffering is secretly wonderful. It's saying that the categories themselves, good and bad, only exist in relation to each other. You can't have one without the other. So wisdom means accepting the strife, not passively, but actively. Understanding that growth requires resistance, that the river needs both banks, that your own life, with all its contradictions and tensions, is part of the larger pattern. This is starting to sound almost stoic, and there's a reason for that. The Stoics, especially Zeno and Chrysippus, were heavily influenced by Heraclitus. They took his fire, his logos, his emphasis on living according to nature, and built it into a systematic philosophy, but they also domesticated him. They turned the wild proclamations about strife and unity into a calm acceptance of fate. Heraclitus was never calm. Fragment 85. It is hard to fight against anger, for what it wants it buys at the price of the soul. Even when you understand the pattern, living according to it is difficult. The passions pull you off course. Anger, desire, fear. These don't just disappear because you've grasped the logos. You have to fight against them, and that fight costs something. But the fight is worth it, because the alternative is remaining asleep. Fragment 73. We should not act and speak like men asleep. Most people are just going through the motions, reacting to stimuli, following their appetites, never stopping to think about what they're doing or why. They're biological machines running programs they didn't write and don't understand. Waking up means interrupting those programs, questioning the assumptions, looking at what everyone else takes for granted and asking if it's actually true. This is why Heraclitus was so contemptuous of the majority, not because he was elitist, though he definitely had that streak, but because most people never even try to wake up. They're content with sleep. Fragment 104. What understanding or intelligence have they? They believe the people's bards and take the crowd as their teacher, not knowing that the many are bad and the few good. The crowd is always wrong, not on specific questions of fact, but on what matters. The majority goes with consensus reality, with social proof, with whatever keeps them comfortable. Wisdom requires breaking from the herd. This is dangerous thinking. It's the kind of thing that gets you exiled or executed. Heraclitus avoided that fate, probably because he was so obscure that the authorities couldn't figure out if he was actually threatening anything. But the attitude is there. The wise man stands apart. He sees what others miss, and he has contempt for those who refuse to look. You can almost hear Nietzsche applauding in the distance. And yes, Nietzsche loved Heraclitus, called him his philosophical twin. The emphasis on becoming over being, the celebration of conflict, the disdain for the comfortable majority, it's all there. Nietzsche took Heraclitus and amplified him, made him louder, more aggressive. But the core ideas were already present 2,500 years earlier. Now here's what makes all of this more than just ancient philosophy. The problems Heraclitus identified haven't gone away. We still treat flux as aberration. We still search for permanence in a world of change. We still want simple answers when reality is irreducibly complex. Take identity, personal identity, the question of what makes you you over time. You're not the same person you were 10 years ago. Your cells have been replaced, your memories have changed, your personality has shifted. So what continuity is there? What persists? The obvious answer is nothing. You're a different person now than you were then. The self is a fiction we construct to give coherence to a series of disconnected moments. But that feels wrong. There's clearly some sense in which you're still you. You remember being that earlier person. You're causally connected to them. Your present state emerged from their past state. Heraclitus would say, you're both right. The person persists and the person changes. It's not one or the other. The identity is the pattern of transformation. You're not a static thing that endures. You're a process that maintains certain continuities while everything else shifts. The river metaphor again. Same river, different water. Same you, different cells, different thoughts, different circumstances. Modern neuroscience backs this up. There's no homunculus, no little person inside your head that's really you. Consciousness is an emergent property of billions of neurons firing in patterns. Those patterns change constantly. The you that's reading this sentence isn't the you that read the previous sentence, but the process is continuous. The pattern persists even as the substrate transforms. Or consider organizations, companies, governments, institutions. They're constantly changing. People leave, new people join. Policies shift. The physical location might move. The mission might evolve. At what point does the organization stop being itself and become something else? When half the people have been replaced, all of them? When the mission changes? There's no clean answer, because organizations, like rivers, are processes, not objects. The identity is in the pattern, not the parts. Apple in 2024 shares almost no personnel with Apple in 1984. But there's clearly continuity. The brand persists. The institutional knowledge persists, transmitted from generation to generation. The culture, for better or worse, persists. It's the same company, and it's not the same company. Heraclitus understood this 2,500 years before we had corporations or brain scans. The fundamental insight was that identity is dynamic, not static. Things are what they're becoming, not what they are at any frozen moment. And the becoming is governed by patterns, by the logos, that remain constant even as everything else flows. But this still leaves the question of the logos itself. What exactly is it? Is it something real, something out there in the world? Or is it just a human projection, a pattern we impose to make sense of chaos? Fragment 1 says the logos is always so. It exists independent of whether anyone recognizes it. This isn't just in our heads. The pattern is real. The transformations follow laws whether we discover them or not. Fire will consume fuel according to the measures Heraclitus described, whether or not anyone is watching. But we only know the logos through our experience of it. We observe the patterns and infer the underlying structure. So there's an unavoidable element of interpretation. Different minds might perceive different patterns in the same phenomena. The logos might be real, but our access to it is mediated by our particular perspective. Heraclitus doesn't resolve this tension. He asserts the logos exists and that most people fail to grasp it. But he never explains how he knows he's grasped it correctly. Maybe he's just as asleep as everyone else, dreaming different dreams. Fragment 72 warns, though they are in daily contact with the logos, they are at variance with it, and what they meet appears alien to them. Being in contact with something doesn't mean you understand it. You can live your whole life immersed in the pattern and never see it. So how do you know? How do you distinguish between genuine insight and elaborate delusion? Heraclitus doesn't give you tools for that. He just asserts that he sees what others miss and expects you to recognize the truth when you hear it. Fragment 50 again. Listening not to me, but to the logos. Don't take his word for it. Look at the pattern yourself. See if it makes sense. If it doesn't, either the pattern isn't real or you haven't understood it yet. Either way, you're on your own. This is both liberating and terrifying. Liberating because you're not bound by authority or tradition. You have to figure it out yourself. Terrifying because there's no guarantee you'll get it right. You might spend your whole life pursuing a pattern that isn't there. You might be the one who's asleep, dreaming that you're awake. The fragments offer no comfort. They just keep pushing. Look harder. Think deeper. Question everything. Don't trust the crowd. Don't trust your senses. Don't even trust me. Trust the logos if you can find it. And if you can't, well, maybe you're not meant to. Fragment 101. I searched myself. That's the method, apparently. Not reading books or consulting experts. Looking inward. Examining your own experience. Watching your own mind work. Seeing how your perceptions shift. How your judgments form. How your emotions arise. The logos is out there in the world, but you find it by studying yourself. Because you're part of the pattern too. You're fire that's temporarily organized into a thinking being. Study how you work, and you'll understand how everything works. This is mystical territory, not religion exactly, but something close. A claim that direct insight is possible, that you can grasp fundamental truths through contemplation. The ancient mystery religions promised something similar. Direct experience of the divine, transformation of consciousness, waking up from the sleep of ordinary existence. Heraclitus wasn't part of those traditions, as far as we know, but he's operating in the same space. The promise of direct knowledge through contemplation. That's a radical claim. Most of us assume that knowledge comes from learning, from accumulation of facts, from studying what others have discovered. You read books, you listen to experts, you build up a mental library of information. That's how you know things. Heraclitus says, no, real understanding doesn't work that way. You can memorize every book ever written and still miss the point entirely. Fragment 40 makes this explicit. Learning of many things does not teach understanding. You can be the most educated person in the room and still be fundamentally confused about reality. Because understanding isn't about quantity of information. It's about seeing the pattern that connects everything. This explains why philosophers have always been suspicious of mere erudition. Knowing a lot isn't the same as understanding deeply. You can have an encyclopedic memory and zero wisdom. The two skills are almost unrelated. One is about storage and retrieval. The other is about synthesis and insight. Fragment 129 takes a shot at earlier thinkers. Pythagoras practiced inquiry more than any other man, and selecting these compositions made himself a wisdom of his own. Much learning, artful knavery. Harsh words for someone who's still famous 25 centuries later. But Heraclitus isn't impressed by Pythagoras' mathematics or mysticism. He sees it as intellectual game playing, clever, but ultimately missing the target. What's the target? The unity underlying multiplicity, the pattern underlying change, the logos that governs everything, but that nobody notices. You don't get there by piling up information. You get there by stripping away assumptions, by questioning what seems obvious, by looking at what everyone else ignores. Fragment 54. The hidden attunement is better than the obvious one. The real harmony isn't the one everyone sees. It's the one beneath the surface, holding the opposites together. The tension between the opposing forces is what creates stability. Like a bow or a lyre, Fragment 51 tells us, the string pulls one way, the wood pulls the other, and that tension is what makes the instrument work. Release the tension, and you don't have an instrument anymore. You have broken pieces. This idea shows up everywhere once you start looking for it. Societies function because of competing interests, not despite them. The push and pull between different groups creates a dynamic equilibrium. Eliminate the tension, and the whole thing collapses. Ecosystems work the same way. Predator and prey, competition and cooperation, growth and decay, all interacting to maintain balance. Remove one element and the system destabilizes. Your own body is a constant negotiation between opposing processes, building up and breaking down, rest and activity, hunger and satiety. You're not a fixed thing. You're a pattern of opposing forces in temporary alignment. But here's what makes this uncomfortable. If the world is fundamentally structured by opposition, then conflict isn't a problem to be solved. It's a feature, not a bug. Peace isn't the absence of tension. It's the right kind of tension, properly balanced. Fragment 80. One must realize that war is shared and conflict is justice, and that all things come to pass in accordance with conflict. War doesn't mean literal warfare here, though Heraclitus probably wouldn't exclude that. It means the struggle between opposing forces, the creative tension that drives everything forward. Justice isn't harmony where everyone agrees. It's the proper balance of competing claims, the right ordering of opposing forces. This goes against every instinct. We want peace, we want agreement, we want the fighting to stop. Heraclitus says, that's a misunderstanding of what the world is. The fighting never stops because the fighting is what holds everything together. The river flows because water moves. Stop the movement and you don't have a river. You have a stagnant pool. The fire burns because fuel is consumed. Stop the consumption and you don't have fire. You have cold ashes. Life exists because organisms compete for resources. Remove competition and you don't have a thriving ecosystem. You have extinction. So what does this mean for how you live? If conflict is fundamental, do you just embrace chaos? Fight everyone? Trust nothing? Fragment 112 offers guidance. Moderation is the greatest virtue, and wisdom is to speak the truth and to act according to nature, paying heed. All moderation, not extremism. The middle path, not the radical position. This seems contradictory at first. If everything is conflict, why advocate for moderation? Because moderation is how you maintain the proper tension. Too much in one direction and the system breaks. Too little and it collapses. The bowstring needs the right amount of tension. Too tight and it snaps. Too loose and it's useless. Speaking truth and acting according to nature means aligning yourself with the logos, not imposing your will on reality, but recognizing how things actually work and working with it. Most people do the opposite. They decide how they want the world to be, and then get angry when it doesn't cooperate. They want stability in a world of flux. They want permanence in a world of change. They want their team to win and stay winning forever. Fragment 23. They would not know the name of justice if these things did not exist. Justice requires injustice. You only understand fairness because unfairness exists. You only value peace because you've experienced conflict. Remove the negative and the positive becomes meaningless. This isn't saying we should celebrate suffering. It's saying suffering is part of the structure of reality, and pretending otherwise just makes you confused. The fragments keep circling back to this theme. Fragment 57. Most people's teacher is Hesiod. They are sure he knew most things. He who did not recognize day and night. They are one. Hesiod was the other great early Greek poet besides Homer, famous for organizing the Greek gods into a family tree and explaining how the world was created. Heraclitus thinks he missed the fundamental point. Day and night aren't separate things that happen to alternate. They're aspects of the same cycle, one implies the other. You can't have day without night because day only means something in contrast to night. Separate them conceptually and you've misunderstood what they are. Same with hot and cold, wet and dry, living and dead. These aren't independent states. They're positions on a continuum, defined by their relationship to each other. Fragment 126. Cold things grow hot, hot things grow cold, wet becomes dry, dry becomes wet. Nothing stays in one state. Everything cycles through the opposites. Your body temperature shifts constantly. The weather changes. Rivers flood and then run dry. The process never stops. Fragment 36. For souls it is death to become water. For water it is death to become earth. But from earth water is born, and from water soul. Even the elements transform into each other. Nothing has a permanent identity. Everything is in transition from one state to another. 2. This should be obvious. We all know things change, but we don't really believe it, not in practice. We treat our current situation as if it's permanent. We make plans as if the world will stay the way it is. We're shocked when circumstances shift, when people change, when what worked yesterday stops working today. Fragment 52. Time is a child playing checkers. The kingdom belongs to a child. Time doesn't follow adult logic. It doesn't build steadily toward a goal. It plays, it experiments, it tries one thing and then another. The universe isn't going anywhere in particular. It's just doing what it does, moment to moment, without a master plan. That's a strange thought. We're used to thinking in terms of progress, development, purpose. History is moving somewhere. Evolution is moving somewhere. Your life is moving somewhere. But what if it isn't? What if there's no destination, just endless transformation? The fire keeps burning, consuming fuel, producing heat and light, then dying down, then flaring up again. No final state, no ultimate goal, just the process itself, continuing indefinitely. Fragment 30. This world order, the same for all no god or man has made, but it always was, and is and will be, ever-living fire, kindling in measures and going out in measures. The cosmos is fire, not literal fire necessarily, though Heraclitus might have meant that too. Fire as a metaphor for constant transformation, for energy that never stays still, for the process that underlies everything. And it's ever-living. It never had a beginning, it will never have an end. It just is, always has been, always will be. No creator required. No ultimate purpose needed. The fire burns because that's what fire does. This is getting close to what later philosophers would call naturalism. The idea that nature is self-sufficient, that it doesn't need a supernatural explanation, that the patterns we observe are all there is. But Heraclitus complicates this by calling the pattern logos, by saying it's wise, by treating it almost like a deity. Fragment 32. The one thing, the only thing wise, is willing and unwilling to be called by the name of Zeus. Zeus was the king of the gods, the ultimate authority in Greek religion. Heraclitus says the Logos is willing and unwilling to be identified with Zeus. It's godlike in its power and permanence, but it's not a person. It's not a being that thinks and acts. It's the structure of reality itself. This ambiguity is probably intentional. Heraclitus is operating in a culture saturated with religious language and imagery. He can't simply dismiss all that, but he's reinterpreting it radically. The divine isn't a supernatural being that intervenes in the world. It's the natural order itself, the logos that governs everything. Prayer and sacrifice won't change it. You can't negotiate with it. You can only try to understand it and align yourself with it. Fragment 5 is scathing about traditional religious practices. They purify themselves by defiling themselves with blood, as if one who stepped into mud were to wash with mud. He would seem mad if anyone noticed him acting thus. Animal sacrifice was central to Greek religion. You killed an animal, offered parts of it to the gods, and ate the rest. This was supposed to purify you, to restore your relationship with the divine. Heraclitus thinks this is absurd. You're covering yourself in blood to become clean? That's like washing mud with more mud. It doesn't work because you've misunderstood what purity is. Purity isn't about ritual actions. It's about understanding, about seeing clearly, about aligning yourself with the Logos. Fragment 14 continues the attack. The secret rites practiced among men are celebrated in an unholy manner. The mystery religions promise salvation through secret rituals, initiations that would transform the participant and guarantee them a blessed afterlife. Heraclitus dismisses this as unholy, not because the rituals are too sacred to discuss, but because they're fundamentally misguided. Real transformation doesn't come from ritual. It comes from understanding, from waking up to how things actually are, from seeing the pattern that everyone else misses. And you can't buy that with sacrifice or achieve it through ceremony. You have to do the work yourself. Fragment 101 again. I searched myself. That's the method. Not following prescribed rituals, not submitting to authority, not joining a religious community, searching yourself, examining your own experience, watching how your mind works, seeing the logos in operation within your own consciousness. This is why the fragments feel so modern. Heraclitus isn't asking you to believe anything on faith. He's asking you to look and think, to question your assumptions, to see what's actually there rather than what you expect to see. Fragment 17. Many do not understand such things as they encounter, nor do they learn by their experience, but they think they do. You can experience something without understanding it. You can live through an event without grasping what it means. Most people do this constantly. They go through life accumulating experiences but never really learning from them because they're not paying attention to the pattern. So how do you pay attention? How do you see what you're not seeing? Fragment 34 offers a clue. Uncomprehending when they have heard, they are like the deaf. The proverb bears witness to them. Present, yet absent. You can be physically present and mentally absent. You can hear words without understanding their meaning. You can look at something without seeing it. This happens all the time. Someone explains something to you clearly, and you nod along, but you haven't really absorbed it. You're present in body, but absent in mind. The question is, what makes the difference? What allows someone to be present in more than body? Fragment 55 gives a stark answer. All things that can be seen, heard and learned, I prefer. Experience matters, but not passive experience, active experience, experience you seek out, pay attention to, think about. Heraclitus values what can be directly encountered, what you can test yourself, what stands up to scrutiny. This puts him at odds with another major figure of his time, Pythagoras. Pythagoras was famous. He'd founded a religious community in southern Italy that combined mathematics, mysticism, and strict rules about diet and behaviour. His followers believed in reincarnation, sacred numbers, and the immortality of the soul. They wouldn't eat beans because they thought beans contained souls. Fragment 40. Much learning does not teach understanding. Otherwise it would have taught Hesiod and Pythagoras, and also Xenophanes and Heraclitus. Brutal. Hesiod was one of the foundational Greek poets. Xenophanes was a respected philosopher. Heraclitus was a pioneering historian. These were the intellectual giants of the age. And Heraclitus says, none of them understand anything. Why? Because they have much learning but no understanding. They've accumulated information without grasping the underlying pattern. They're like people who've memorized a map but can't navigate actual terrain. Fragment 129 specifically targets Pythagoras. Pythagoras, son of Menasarchus, practiced inquiry more than all other men, and selecting from these writings, made a wisdom of his own. Much learning, bad art. Bad art, kakotechnia, poor technique. Pythagoras studied everything, collected knowledge from every source, synthesized it into a system. But the system was built on misunderstanding. What was the misunderstanding? Pythagoras thought reality had a hidden structure, and that this structure was mathematical. Numbers were the key to everything. The cosmos operated according to numerical ratios and geometric patterns. Heraclitus might have agreed with the first part. Reality does have a hidden structure, but the structure isn't numerical. It's dialectical. It's tension, opposition, transformation. You can't capture it in equations because it's not static. It's process. Pythagoras built a beautiful intellectual edifice, but it was grounded in the wrong foundation. Much learning, bad art. Fragment 42 goes further. Homer deserves to be thrown out of the contests and thrashed, and so does Archilochus. Homer, the poet whose works defined Greek culture. The author every educated Greek had memorized. The voice that shaped how Greeks understood gods, heroes, warfare, honor, everything, deserves to be thrown out and beaten. Why? Because Homer presents the gods as petty, vindictive beings who interfere in human affairs for personal reasons. Because the Iliad glorifies warfare and treats human suffering as entertainment for immortals. Because it teaches people to see the world as governed by arbitrary supernatural forces rather than by natural law. It's brilliantly told, but it's fundamentally false. And false teaching, no matter how beautiful, is worse than no teaching at all, because it fills people's minds with illusions. This is why Heraclitus was called the Obscure, not because his fragments are unclear, though they are, but because his standards were impossible. You can't just listen to the wise. The wise are often wrong. You can't just accumulate learning. Learning without understanding is worthless. You can't follow tradition. Tradition is mostly sleepwalking. You can't rely on your own experience. Experience without reflection teaches nothing. So what can you do? Fragment 50 returns to the answer. Listening not to me, but to the Logos, it is wise to agree that all things are one. Listen to the pattern itself, not to Heraclitus, not to Homer, not to Pythagoras, to the structure of reality that reveals itself when you pay attention. And what does it reveal? That all things are one. This is the hardest fragment to understand, because it seems to contradict everything else. Heraclitus has been insisting that everything changes, that opposites are in constant tension, that war is the father of all things. How can all things be one if everything is in conflict? Fragment 51 helps. They do not understand how, while differing, it agrees with itself. There is a backward turning connection, like that of the bow and the lyre. The bow, you pull the string back. The two ends of the bow curve toward each other, under tension. The string wants to snap forward. The wood wants to straighten. They're pulling in opposite directions, but this tension is what makes the bow work. Release the string and the arrow flies. The conflict between string and wood creates the unity that is the bow's function. The lyre, same principle. Strings stretched tight across a resonating chamber. Tension between the pull of the strings and the resistance of the frame. That tension produces music. Differing, it agrees with itself. The unity isn't despite the conflict. The unity is because of the conflict. Fragment 8 makes the same point. What is opposed brings together. The finest harmony is composed of things at variance, and everything comes to be in accordance with strife. This is sophisticated. Most people think harmony means everything agrees. Everyone gets along. No conflict. Peace. But musical harmony isn't one note. It's different notes played together. Notes that are in tension with each other. Notes that create dissonance and resolution. The finest harmony is composed of things at variance. Reality works the same way. Day and night aren't two separate things that happen to follow each other. They're aspects of a single cycle. Each defines the other. Each creates the other. Remove one, and the other becomes meaningless. Health and sickness, same thing. You can't understand health except in relation to sickness. The body maintains health through constant struggle against disease, through immune responses, through cellular repair. Health is an achievement, not a state, life and death. Fragment 62. Immortals are mortal, mortals immortal, living the other's death, dead in the other's life. This sounds like mystical nonsense until you think about it. What dies when you die? Your body. But bodies are made of matter that existed before you were born and will continue existing after you die. The atoms that compose you are immortal. They've been around for billions of years. They'll be around for billions more. What lives when you're alive? A pattern, an organization of matter, a process. And that process is constantly dying and being reborn. Cells die, new cells form. The you that exists now is not the same you that existed 7 years ago. Every cell has been replaced. Living the other's death, dead in the other's life. The pattern persists through constant transformation. The river stays the same river by never being the same water. Fragment 88. The same thing is both living and dead, waking and sleeping, young and old. For these things having changed around are those, and those in turn, having changed around, are these. Change around. Metaphysical. Transformed into each other. You were young. Now you're old. But old age isn't something added to youth. It's youth transformed. The young person became the old person. They're the same individual, undergoing a process. You sleep. You wake. But waking isn't unrelated to sleeping. You wake from sleep. Sleep prepares waking. They're phases of a single cycle. Everything flows into everything else. Nothing stands apart. All things are one, not because they're identical, but because they're aspects of a single process. This is why most people don't understand. They see things as separate. Day versus night. Life versus death. Good versus bad. They don't see the connections, the transformations, the underlying unity. Fragment 103. Common is the beginning and the end in the circumference of a circle. Walk around a circle. Where's the beginning? Where's the end? Wherever you start becomes the beginning. Wherever you stop becomes the end. But they're arbitrary. The circle itself has neither beginning nor end. Reality is like this. We impose beginnings and endings on processes that don't have them. We divide continuous flows into discrete events. We create boundaries that don't exist. And then we fight about our categories. We declare war on death. We try to stop change. We cling to youth. We resist transformation, all because we don't see the pattern. Fragment 102. To God all things are beautiful and good and just, but humans suppose some things to be unjust and others just. To God, or to the Logos, to the perspective that sees the whole pattern rather than one fragment. From that perspective, everything is necessary. Everything fits. The tension between opposites creates the harmony. The strife produces the cosmos. But humans carve reality into pieces and judge the pieces. This is good. That is bad. This should exist. That should not. And this creates suffering. Not because reality is unjust, but because we're fighting against how things actually work. Fragment 23. They would not know the name of justice if these things did not exist. What things? Injustice, suffering, wrong. You can't have justice without injustice. You can't have the concept of right without the possibility of wrong. The opposites define each other. This doesn't mean you shouldn't fight injustice. It means you should understand that the fight itself is part of the pattern. Justice isn't a final state you achieve. It's a tension you maintain. Fragment 80 again. It is necessary to know that war is common, and justice is strife, and all things come to be in accordance with strife and necessity. War is common, shared, universal, not an aberration, not something to be eliminated, the fundamental condition. Justice is strife, not the absence of conflict, but the right kind of conflict, the productive tension, the struggle that creates rather than destroys. This is dark teaching. It says the world is not designed for your comfort. It's not built to make you happy. It's a battlefield where opposing forces clash eternally. But it's also liberating teaching, because it means you can stop expecting the world to be different than it is. You can stop being surprised by conflict. You can stop feeling betrayed when things change. Fragment 52. Time is a child playing drafts. The kingship belongs to a child. Drafts, an ancient board game. A child plays with pieces, moving them according to rules, creating patterns, then sweeping them away and starting over. That's time. That's the cosmos, not a wise ruler carefully managing affairs, not a benevolent parent protecting children, a child playing a game. The kingship belongs to a child. This is either terrifying or freeing depending on your perspective. Terrifying if you need reality to have a purpose, a plan, a concern for your welfare. Freeing if you can accept that the universe doesn't owe you anything, that meaning isn't given but created, that you're responsible for making sense of your own existence. Fragment 119. A person's character is his fate. Ethos anthropoi daimon. Character is destiny, not because some external force rewards good character and punishes bad, but because your character determines how you respond to circumstances, how you see things, how you act, what you notice, what you ignore. Two people encounter the same situation. One sees opportunity, the other sees threat. The situation is the same. The outcome differs because the people differ. Your character is the lens through which reality appears to you. Change the lens, change the reality you experience. But can you change your character? Fragment 101 one more time. I searched myself. This is the only method. You can't change what you don't see. You can't transform what you don't understand. You have to search yourself. Examine how you think. Watch how you react. Notice your patterns. Most people never do this. They live their entire lives without ever really looking at themselves. They react without thinking. They follow habits without questioning them. They remain asleep. Fragment 73. One must not act and speak like people asleep. The alternative to sleep is waking, and waking requires effort. It requires paying attention to what you normally ignore, questioning what you normally accept, seeing what's actually there rather than what you expect to see. It requires recognizing that you might be wrong about everything, that the wise might be fools, that tradition might be delusion, that your own experience might teach you nothing if you don't reflect on it. Fragment 1 promised that people would remain uncomprehending even after hearing the logos explained. That's not because the logos is complicated, it's because understanding requires waking up, and most people prefer sleep, but some people wake, some people search themselves, some people see the pattern, and for them, Fragment 50's promise becomes real. Listening not to Heraclitus, but to the Logos itself, they discover that all things are one. Not one in the sense of identical, one in the sense of interconnected, interdependent aspects of a single flowing process. Everything changes, everything flows, everything transforms into its opposite. And that's not chaos, that's the deepest order. That's the Logos, the pattern hidden from those who don't look, the unity beneath the strife, the cosmic fire that kindles and extinguishes in measures, creating everything that exists through eternal transformation. Heraclitus died around 475 BCE. He may have been 60 years old, he may have been older. The sources disagree. What they agree on is that he died badly. The story of Heraclitus' death became another legend, another piece of the mythology that grew around the man who walked alone. Diogenes Laertius, writing centuries later, offers several versions. In one account, Heraclitus fell ill with dropsy. Fluid accumulated in his body. He consulted physicians. They couldn't help him. So Heraclitus, true to form, decided to cure himself. He covered his body in cow dung and lay in the sun. The theory, apparently, was that the heat would dry out the excess fluid. It didn't work. He died covered in manure. Dogs came and ate parts of his body because they couldn't recognize him under the filth. Another version says he simply withdrew to the mountains, ate grass like an animal, and died alone. Still another claims he buried himself in a stable, hoping the warmth of the dung would cure him. These stories are almost certainly false. They're too convenient, too symbolic. A man who despised humanity dies rejected by humans and consumed by dogs. A philosopher who valued Logos dies like an irrational beast. The tales serve a purpose. They turn Heraclitus into a cautionary figure. Look what happens when you separate yourself from society. Look what pride brings. But there's another possibility. Maybe he just died of an illness. Maybe there was no dramatic end, no symbolic conclusion, just an old man getting sick and not recovering. That would be appropriate too, the philosopher of flux experiencing the ultimate transformation. The thinker who said, you can't step in the same river twice, discovering you can't stay in the same body forever. What's certain is that he left behind words, fragments, pieces of a book that was probably deposited in the temple of Artemis at Ephesus. The book itself is lost. What survives comes from quotations in other writers. Plato mentions Heraclitus. Aristotle engages with his ideas. Stoic philosophers centuries later build entire systems on foundations he laid. The fragments themselves are strange. They don't form a continuous argument. They contradict each other, or seem to. They're deliberately obscure in places. Heraclitus wanted readers to work, to think, to struggle with meaning. He succeeded. 2,500 years later, we're still arguing about what he meant. Consider Fragment 45. You could not discover the limits of soul, even if you travelled every road. So deep is its Logos. The soul has depths that can't be measured by travel. You won't find its boundaries by going places. You find them by going inward, by searching yourself, as Fragment 101 instructed. This idea would echo through Western philosophy. Socrates would make self-examination the foundation of the examined life. Augustine would explore the interior landscape of consciousness. Descartes would find certainty in the thinking self. All of them walking roads Heraclitus mapped. But Heraclitus wasn't interested in the individual soul for its own sake. Fragment 115. The soul has a Logos that increases itself. The soul participates in the cosmic Logos. It's not separate from the pattern. It's part of it. When you search yourself, you're not discovering something private and personal. You're discovering the universal structure that operates in you. This is why Fragment 50 matters so much. When you listen not to Heraclitus, but to the Logos, you recognize that all things are one. Not because everything is identical, but because everything participates in the same process, the same pattern, the same transformation. Fragment 36. For souls, it is death to become water. For water, it is death to become earth. But from earth comes water, and from water, soul. Everything transforms into everything else. Soul becomes water, becomes earth, becomes water, becomes soul. The cycle continues. Nothing is permanent, nothing is lost, everything changes form. This isn't reincarnation in the religious sense. It's transformation in the physical sense. The elements that compose you will compose something else. The pattern continues. You're not separate from nature. You're an instance of it, a temporary configuration of the cosmic fire. Fragment 76 extends this. Fire lives the death of earth, and air lives the death of fire. Water lives the death of air, earth lives the death of water. Each element exists through the destruction of another. Life requires death. Creation requires destruction. You can't have one without the other. Modern science would confirm this in ways Heraclitus couldn't have imagined. Stars forge heavy elements through nuclear fusion. Those elements scatter through space when stars explode. They condense into planets. They combine into molecules. Those molecules organize into cells. Those cells form bodies. Those bodies think and feel and eventually decompose. The atoms continue. The pattern continues. Heraclitus saw this without telescopes or laboratories. He saw it through thinking. Fragment 90. All things are an exchange for fire, and fire for all things, as goods for gold and gold for goods. Fire is the currency of transformation. Everything converts into fire. Fire converts into everything. The metaphor is economic, precise. You exchange gold for goods, goods for gold. Value flows. Form changes. The exchange continues. This is why Fragment 30 calls the cosmos an ever-living fire, kindling in measures and extinguishing in measures. The universe isn't a thing. It's a process, a continuous exchange, a perpetual transformation. Fire is the perfect symbol because fire doesn't exist as a substance. Fire is pure process, pure change, pure becoming, and yet there's order, measures. The kindling and extinguishing follow patterns, not random, not chaotic, lawful. Fragment 94. The sun will not overstep its measures, otherwise the Furies, ministers of justice, will find it out. Even the sun obeys limits. Natural laws aren't suggestions, they're necessities. Break them and consequence follows. Not because gods enforce rules, because the pattern itself maintains itself. This is justice in the cosmic sense. Dike, not reward and punishment for moral behaviour, but the balancing force that prevents excess. That restores equilibrium. That ensures the pattern continues. Fragment 80 again. One should know that war is common and justice is strife, and everything comes about in accordance with strife and necessity. Justice is strife, the tension between opposites, the conflict that generates change. This is how things must be, not how things should be, how they are. Can you live with this? Can you accept a universe where conflict is necessary? Where destruction is creative? Where your death is someone else's life? Most people can't. They need meaning imposed from outside, purpose given by authority, comfort provided by belief. They need to be told that suffering serves a plan, that death isn't final, that justice will eventually prevail in a way that makes sense to human values. Heraclitus offers none of this. Fragment 102. To God, all things are beautiful and good and just, but humans suppose some things to be unjust and others just. God sees the whole pattern, humans see fragments. From the cosmic perspective, everything is necessary. Everything belongs. The categories of good and evil, just and unjust, are human impositions on a reality that precedes them. This sounds like nihilism. If nothing is truly good or evil, why care about anything? Why act morally? Why not just pursue power or pleasure or whatever you want? But that's missing the point. Heraclitus isn't saying values don't exist. He's saying they're human constructions, which means we're responsible for them. We create meaning, we establish values, we decide what matters. Fragment 119 returns. Character is fate. You're responsible for who you become, not because gods judge you, because your character determines your experience, your response to circumstances, your participation in the pattern. This is radical freedom combined with radical responsibility. No one else will save you. No cosmic parent will rescue you. No final judgment will vindicate you. You have only yourself, your choices, your character, your response to the logos that speaks through everything. Fragment 112. Moderation is the greatest virtue, and wisdom is to speak the truth and to act according to nature, paying heed, sophrosina. Self-control, moderation. Not because excess is sinful, because excess disrupts the pattern, creates imbalance, leads to correction. And wisdom is to speak the truth, to act according to nature, to pay attention to what actually is rather than what you wish were true. This is harder than it sounds. Truth often contradicts comfort. Nature often contradicts desire. Paying attention requires constant effort, constant vigilance, constant questioning of your own assumptions. Fragment 111, final time. I searched myself. This is the method. This is the path. Not following tradition, not accepting authority, not believing what you're told. Searching yourself, examining your thoughts, testing your beliefs, watching how you react and why. Most people never do this. They live on autopilot, react from habit, follow patterns they've never questioned. They remain asleep, even while walking around. Fragment 73. One must not act and speak like people asleep. The alternative is waking, and waking is uncomfortable. It means seeing things you'd rather not see, about yourself, about others, about reality. It means accepting that most of what you believe might be wrong, that most of what you value might be arbitrary, that most of what you fear might be illusion. But it also means discovering something real, the logos, the pattern, the unity beneath the diversity, the order within the chaos, the fire that kindles and extinguishes in measures, creating everything through transformation. Heraclitus died, his body decomposed, the elements scattered. The pattern continued. His words survived in fragments quoted by others. Those fragments influenced thinkers who built systems. Those systems shaped civilizations. Those civilizations produced people who still read his words and wonder what they mean. Is this immortality? Not in the personal sense. Heraclitus as an individual is gone. But Heraclitus as a node in the pattern continues. His insights flow into the stream of human thought. They transform. They combine with other ideas. They influence minds that influence actions that shape reality. Fragment 84a. Changing, it rests. The paradox stands. Motion is rest. Transformation is stability. The river flows but remains a river. The fire burns but remains fire. You change but remain you, until you don't. The Stoics would build on this. Marcus Aurelius would write meditations incorporating Heraclitean themes. Epictetus would teach students to accept what they can't control and focus on what they can. The pattern Heraclitus identified would become practical philosophy, a way of living, not just a theory about reality, but a method for navigating it. Later, much later, Nietzsche would recognize something in Heraclitus, a kindred spirit, someone who looked at existence without flinching, who accepted becoming without demanding being, who saw conflict as creative rather than destructive. Nietzsche would call him a contemporary, across 24 centuries, because some insights transcend their moment. And later still, process philosophy would emerge. Alfred North Whitehead and others would argue that reality is fundamentally constituted by processes rather than substances, that becoming is more fundamental than being, that relations are more real than things. They were rediscovering what Heraclitus taught. Even physics would echo him. Conservation of energy, matter and energy interconverting, systems far from equilibrium generating order through dissipation, the universe as process rather than object. Science arrived at conclusions Heraclitus reached through pure thought. But understanding Heraclitus intellectually isn't the same as understanding him existentially. You can know that everything changes, but do you accept it? Can you let go when you need to? Can you embrace transformation even when it destroys what you love? Fragment 88. What is in us is the same thing, living and dead, awake and sleeping, young and old. For these things having changed around are those, and those having changed around are these. The opposites are connected. Death is in life, sleep is in waking, age is in youth. Not as corruption, but as potential, as transformation waiting to occur. You contain your own opposite. You carry your death within you, every moment, not morbidly, factually, and that fact should change how you live, not by making you fearful, by making you present, by making you aware that this moment is all you have, that the river flows, that you can't step in it twice. Fragment 52 haunts with its simplicity. Time is a child playing drafts, the kingly power is a child's. The cosmos is game, reality is play, no grand purpose imposed from outside, just transformation, following rules we glimpse but never fully grasp. The child doesn't play to win in some ultimate sense. The child plays because playing is what children do. The game itself is the point. This disturbs us. We want meaning, we want purpose. We want our suffering to serve something beyond itself. We want the story to be going somewhere. Heraclitus offers no such comfort. The fire kindles and extinguishes. The river flows. The child plays. That's all. That's everything. But there's strange liberation in this. If there's no cosmic scorekeeper, no final judgment, no ultimate purpose imposed from outside, then you're free to create meaning through how you live, through what you choose, through how you respond to what the fire brings. Fragment 119. Character is fate. Not the stars, not the gods, not blind chance, your character. The patterns you've built into yourself through repeated choices, the habits that constitute who you are. These determine your trajectory more than external circumstances. You can't control the river, but you can learn to swim. You can develop the character that responds well to change rather than being destroyed by it. This is wisdom, not knowledge about facts, skill in living. The fire tests everything. Most people fail the test not because they're unlucky, but because they're unprepared, because they've built their identity on things that inevitably change, because they've mistaken the temporary for the permanent. Fragment 45. You could not discover the limits of soul, even if you travelled every road to do so. Such is the depth of its meaning. The soul isn't a thing you have. It's a depth you are, infinite interiority. The Logos manifests in consciousness as this bottomless capacity for awareness, for reflection, for questioning. You can spend your entire life exploring yourself and never reach the end, not because you're special, but because consciousness itself is structured this way. Reflexive, self-referential, capable of observing its own observing. This is what makes humans distinct, not intelligence exactly. Animals are intelligent, not language precisely. Animals communicate. But this peculiar depth, this ability to question our own questioning, to wonder about our own wondering. Heraclitus saw this, saw that the journey inward is as infinite as the journey outward, that knowing yourself isn't a project you complete, but a process you engage. Fragment 101. I searched into myself. 3 words, an entire methodology. Don't ask the priests, don't consult the oracles, don't rely on tradition. Look, investigate, think. This was radical, revolutionary, the foundation of all philosophy to come, the insistence that truth is accessible through disciplined self-examination, that you can know reality by understanding your own mind's relationship to it. Socrates would inherit this, the unexamined life not worth living. Know thyself. But Heraclitus got there first, saw that the logos you seek outside is already operating inside. That understanding requires introspection as much as observation. The fragments end, or rather, they stop. We have perhaps a tenth of what Heraclitus wrote, maybe less. The rest is lost, burned in fires, literal ones, or dissolved in time, scattered like atoms when books decay. But what remains is enough. Enough to transmit the pattern, enough to kindle new fires in new minds, enough to keep the logos flowing through human thought. You're standing in the river now, right now, reading these words, which are transforming you, slightly, imperceptibly. But transformation nonetheless. You're not the same person who started reading. You can't be. The river flows. You've stepped in it. You've stepped out again. Different water, different you. This isn't metaphor. This is physics, biology, psychology. The atoms in your body are cycling through. The neural patterns in your brain are reorganizing. The person reading this sentence is not the person who read the previous one, except in the pattern that persists through change. Heraclitus would have smiled, not because he was right, though he was, but because the river keeps proving him right. Every moment, every transformation, every time someone thinks they've grasped something permanent, only to watch it slip away. The fire still burns, not the same fire, not different fire, the fire that is both and neither, the fire that transforms fuel into light and heat and ash, the fire that creates by destroying, the fire that is, according to Heraclitus, the fundamental stuff of reality. Modern physics would say energy, conservation laws, transformation without loss, everything changing form but nothing being created or destroyed, just reorganized, recombined, transformed. Same principle, different language, the pattern persists. Fragment 30, this cosmos the same for all, no god nor human made, but it ever was and is and will be, ever living fire, kindling in measures and being quenched in measures. No creation story, no creator god, no beginning, no end, just process, eternal process. The fire that was never lit because it was always burning, the fire that will never go out because going out is just another transformation. This terrified people. Still does? We want origins, we want endings, we want the story to have a narrative arc. Beginning, middle, end, problem, struggle, resolution. Reality doesn't care. The fire burns. The river flows. The child plays. The game continues without needing justification. You are fire, temporarily organized into this particular pattern called your body, your mind, your personality. The pattern persists through constant transformation, atoms cycling through, cells dying and being replaced, thoughts arising and dissolving, memories forming and fading, all of it fire, all of it flow, all of it impermanent, except the pattern of impermanence itself. Fragment 51. They do not comprehend how, in differing, it agrees with itself. There is a backwards turning attunement like that of the bow and the lyre. Tension creates harmony. The bow works because the string pulls against the wood. The lyre makes music because strings are stretched between opposing forces. Remove the tension and you lose the function. Reality operates this way. Opposites don't cancel each other. They constitute each other, create each other, need each other. Day needs night, life needs death, hot needs cold. Not as external opponents, but as internal necessities. You can't have one without the other. Not because of some mystical principle, but because the terms are defined relationally. Hot means hotter than something. Life means not yet dead. Up requires down to have meaning. The unity isn't found by eliminating difference. It's found in understanding how differences create harmony through their interaction, how tension produces stability, how conflict generates order. This is hard wisdom. We want peace to mean no conflict. We want harmony to mean everyone agreeing. We want resolution without tension. Heraclitus says no. The harmony is the tension. The peace is the managed conflict. The resolution is the dynamic balance, not the static equilibrium. Like riding a bicycle, you stay upright through constant small adjustments, through continuous correction of imbalance. Stop adjusting and you fall. The stability is the process, not a state you achieve and maintain. Fragment 8. What opposes unites. From different tones comes the fairest tune. All things are born through strife. Strife isn't disorder, it's creative principle. The clash of opposites generates novelty, produces complexity, drives evolution. Without conflict, nothing changes. Without change, nothing develops. Without development, existence becomes static, dead. The fire needs fuel to burn. The fuel must be different from the fire. The difference creates the process. The process is reality. You are strife, internal conflicts between desires, between reason and emotion, between what you want and what you know is right. This isn't dysfunction. This is how consciousness works, how decisions emerge, how character forms. The person with no internal conflict isn't enlightened. They're simple. The complexity comes from managing multiple competing values, desires, needs, from navigating contradiction without being paralyzed by it. Fragment 49. We step and do not step into the same rivers. We are and are not. The final paradox, the deepest truth. You are continuous and discontinuous, same and different, being and becoming, substance and process. Both are true, neither is complete. Reality transcends the categories we use to describe it. Not because reality is mystical, but because our categories are limited. Tools, useful, but not reality itself. The map is not the territory. The menu is not the meal. The word is not the thing. But we keep forgetting this, keep mistaking our descriptions for what they describe. Heraclitus knew that all language, all thought, all philosophy is fire trying to understand fire. The logos trying to comprehend itself. The river trying to grasp its own flowing. Impossible task, necessary task, the only task worth attempting. So what do we do with this? How do we live with the knowledge that everything changes, including ourselves? That nothing lasts except the pattern of not lasting? Fragment 94 offers guidance. The sun will not overstep his measures. Otherwise, the Furies, ministers of justice, will find him out. Even cosmic forces follow law, not imposed from outside, inherent in their nature. The sun doesn't choose to follow its path. The path is what the sun is. You too have measures, limits, boundaries that define you, not restrictions imposed by others, but natural constraints that make you what you are. The fire burns in measures, too little and it dies, too much and it consumes everything, including itself. Wisdom is learning your measures, understanding what you can sustain, what patterns serve you, what transformations align with your nature rather than destroying it. This isn't about finding some fixed essence. You're fire, not stone, but fire has patterns, behaviors, consistent ways of transforming. Understanding those patterns is understanding yourself. The river flows, but rivers have banks, channels, watersheds. The flow isn't random, it follows terrain, creates terrain, shapes and is shaped by what it moves through. You are both river and bank, flow and structure, becoming and being. The art is holding both, living the paradox without resolving it prematurely. Heraclitus died around 475 BCE, 25 centuries ago. His body became earth. His thoughts became fragments. The fragments became influences. The influences became us. Here, now, considering his words. The pattern persists through transformation, not identical, not separate. The fire burns, different fuel, same fire. He spoke of the logos, the pattern, the principle of transformation that is reality itself. We're still discovering what he meant, still finding his insights confirmed by sciences he couldn't imagine, still learning to live with truths he articulated when philosophy was young. Nothing is permanent except impermanence. Nothing lasts except change. Nothing endures except the pattern of transformation itself. This isn't pessimism, it's realism. And paradoxically, accepting it brings strange peace. Because if nothing lasts, then this moment is all there is. This breath, this thought, this experience of being alive right now. Not precious because it will last, precious because it won't. The fire burns, you are fire, burning now. Transforming fuel into experience, into consciousness, into this strange capacity to know that you are, and to wonder what that means. Fragment 32. One thing, the only truly wise thing, does not and does consent to be called by the name of Zeus, or the truth transcends naming, resists capture, slips away when you think you've grasped it, and yet reveals itself continuously to those who learn to see. Heraclitus saw the fire, saw the river, saw the logos, saw that everything is and is not. That wisdom is knowing you don't know, that the universe is a child playing. That character is fate. He saw that we step and do not step into the same rivers, that we are and are not. And in seeing this, he saw everything, the fundamental nature of reality, the pattern beneath the chaos, the fire that kindles and extinguishes in measures, creating all things through transformation. The river flows, you're standing in it. Already you're not who you were when this began. Already the fire has transformed you, slightly, imperceptibly, but transformation nonetheless. That's all. That's everything. The logos, the pattern, the fire, the flow. Heraclitus spoke. The fragments remain. The river continues, and you, reading this now, are part of the pattern, part of the fire, part of the eternal transformation that is reality itself. The fragments stop here, but the river hasn't stopped. The fire still burns. Not the same fire Heraclitus saw 2,500 years ago. Not a different fire either. The same process, transforming different fuel, creating different light. You've spent this time with a man who died badly, alone, possibly covered in dung, definitely isolated from the humanity he despised. A man who gave up power, rejected his family's priesthood, walked away from a comfortable life to think thoughts that made him hated, who wrote in riddles because he believed easy answers teach nothing, who looked at reality without flinching and reported back that everything you think is stable is actually burning. And here's what's strange. He was right. Not metaphorically right. Actually right. Everything you are, everything you own, everyone you love, it's all transformation. Controlled fire, patterns maintained through constant change. You're not the person who started reading this. Can't be. Too much has shifted. Cells have died. New thoughts have formed. The river flowed. This isn't comforting. It's not supposed to be. Heraclitus wasn't offering comfort. He was offering truth. And truth burns. It consumes illusions, destroys false certainties, leaves you standing in the ashes of what you thought you knew, forced to rebuild with materials that won't stay solid. But here's what the burning reveals. If nothing is permanent, then nothing can be lost permanently either. The elements that compose you will compose something else. The patterns you create will influence patterns you'll never see. The fire you are will become other fires, different forms. Same process. Your death is in you now, not waiting in the future, present in every cell that's dying to make room for new ones, present in every thought that dissolves to allow the next. You're living your death and dying your life simultaneously. The opposites aren't separate. They're aspects of the same transformation. Can you accept this? Most people can't. They build their lives on the fantasy of permanence, accumulate possessions that will scatter, form attachments that will break, construct identities that will dissolve. Then they suffer when the fire does what fire does, when the river flows, when time plays its game. Heraclitus asks you to see clearly, to watch the transformation without demanding it stop, to recognize that the conflict you're experiencing isn't a problem to solve, but the structure of existence itself. That the tension between what you want and what is creates the space where life happens. This doesn't mean accepting everything passively, it means understanding what you're working with. The fire burns in measures. You have agency within the pattern. Your character shapes your fate, not because fate is predetermined, but because your character determines how you respond to what comes. The same circumstances hit different people differently. Not because circumstances are different, because people are. Fragment 101. Search yourself. That's still the method. Not reading more books, not accumulating more knowledge, not following more teachers. Looking directly at your own mind. Watching how it works. Seeing the logos operating in your own consciousness. The patterns, the transformations, the constant flux that you mistake for stability. Do this long enough and something shifts, not dramatically, not suddenly, but the grip loosens, the demand for permanence weakens, the resistance to change decreases. You start to flow with the river instead of fighting it, not because you've given up, but because you've understood. The fire still burns, in you, as you, through you. Every breath is combustion, every thought is transformation, every moment is the universe reorganizing itself into patterns that will dissolve and reform. You're not separate from this. You're not watching it happen. You are it happening. Heraclitus saw this, spoke it, died. The pattern continued. His words survived in fragments that influenced minds that built systems, that shaped civilizations that produced you. Here, now, considering these ideas, the transformation continues. Nothing is lost, nothing is gained, everything changes form. The child plays, the game continues, the fire kindles in measures and extinguishes in measures. Reality doesn't need your understanding to be what it is, but understanding changes how you participate, changes what you create, changes what you leave behind when the fire that is you becomes something else. You will die, not someday, now, continuously, every moment replacing the previous moment, every cell dying to make room for new ones, every thought dissolving into the next. The person you are now won't exist tomorrow, can't exist tomorrow. The river flows. You can't step in it twice. This is the truth Heraclitus died trying to articulate. Not that life is meaningless. That meaning is something you create through how you live. Not that nothing matters, that everything matters precisely because it's temporary. Not that you should despair, that you should wake up, pay attention, see what's actually there instead of what you wish were there. The Logos speaks through everything, through the stars that burn in measures, through the rivers that flow in patterns, through your own consciousness that arises and dissolves moment by moment. Listen, not to me, not to Heraclitus, to the pattern itself. It's right there. It's always been there. You've been living inside it your entire life without seeing it. The fire burns, you are fire, burning now, creating light, creating heat, creating this strange capacity to know that you exist and to wonder why. That's enough. That has to be enough, because it's all there is. The river flows, the child plays, the cosmos transforms. Heraclitus spoke. The fragments remain. And you reading this are standing in the river right now, changed by the flowing, part of the pattern, fire recognizing fire, the Logos comprehending itself through your consciousness. Everything changes, everything flows, everything is and is not. That's not the problem. That's the answer. The only answer there's ever been. The truth that burns away everything false until only the pattern remains. The pattern remains. The fire continues. And somewhere, in some sense that transcends time, Heraclitus is still speaking, still pointing at the river, still insisting you look at what you'd rather ignore, still teaching the hardest lesson there is. You are transformation itself, not a thing that transforms. The transformation, the process, the fire,